This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
The New York Times is reporting that Navy SEALs who witnessed their platoon chief commit war crimes in Iraq were encouraged not to speak out and told they could lose their jobs for reporting him at a private meeting with a superior officer last year. According to a confidential Navy criminal investigation obtained by the Times, the commandos said they saw Special Operations Chief Edward Gallagher stab and kill an unarmed teenage captive, shoot to death a young girl and old man, and fire indiscriminately into crowds of civilians. But when the men on Gallagher's team called a private meeting with their troop commander and demanded an investigation, they were told to stay quiet on the matter and no action was taken. The group of 7 SEALs eventually were able to force an investigation, and Chief Edward Gallagher was arrested in September on more than a dozen charges, including premeditated murder and attempted murder.
The court-martial centers on a charge that Gallagher stabbed to death a teenage member of the Islamic State while the unarmed youth was being treated by a medic. Gallagher allegedly also photographed members of his platoon posing with the corpse in what was dubbed a re-enlistment ceremony. Gallagher then reportedly texted a photo of the dead captive to another SEAL saying, quote, "Good story behind this, got him with my hunting knife." According to legal filings obtained by the Navy Times, 2 other SEAL petty officers have said Gallagher bragged about killing, quote, 10 to 20 people a day or 150 to 200 people on deployment. A fellow sniper told investigators Gallagher claimed, quote, he averaged 3 kills a day over 80 days. The investigation also unveiled the words, "Eddie G puts the laughter in manslaughter," were once scrawled on the wall of a kill site in Mosul, Iraq. Gallagher's trial begins May 28th. If convicted, he could face life in prison. The Navy's also charged Gallagher's boss for failing to report a war crime and for destroying evidence. Joining us now from Colorado Springs, Colorado, is the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Dave Phillips, national correspondent for the New York Times. His latest piece headline, "Navy SEALs were warned against reporting their chief for war crimes." Dave Phillips, welcome to Democracy Now! This is an explosive piece. Tell us about how you found out, how you discovered the story. What happened to this platoon and their allegations?
Well, thanks for having me on. The story, of course, first came to my attention when he was arrested and charged. Whenever a chief of a platoon is arrested and charged with manslaughter and murder, you immediately pay attention and try and figure out what's going on behind the scenes, because as grim as it may sound, it would be very easy to make this type of thing go away if everyone was on board. You can imagine a platoon in a place like Mosul. If someone wanted to kill someone who didn't necessarily fall into the legal parameters, that could happen and no one would say anything if everyone was okay with it. But what struck me is that there was a schism in this platoon where clearly there were people who were not okay with what was going on and thought their chief had gone over the line. So when I saw his arrest, I really wanted to see what was going on behind the scenes. And I was lucky enough to get a really rare look at these confidential documents, about 500 pages of Navy criminal investigation that interviewed these SEALs, that included hundreds of text messages from the chief's seized phone, and they really gave us almost unprecedented look at how these things unfolded. And as you mentioned at the top, there was a lot of details in there of killing, of indiscriminate shooting. But what also struck me over and over again is you have one SEAL who is accused of doing things that went beyond the law and murdering people. But then you have 7 SEALs at least who stood up and said, this is wrong, our superior is doing something wrong, and they did what they are supposed to do. They, according to the documents and what they told investigators, they went to their chain of command and tried for months to get an investigation started. And they were told, I think, I don't know what the motivation behind it was, but they were told, look, decompress, don't worry about this. This could ruin your career. You might want to think about this. This could take down other people. And, you know, they were really frustrated that even though they saw something abhorrent, their chain of command seemed unwilling to act.
Well, last month, President Trump tweeted, quote, "In honor of his past service to our country, Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher will soon be moved to less restrictive confinement while he awaits his day in court. Process should move quickly," President Trump tweeted. So, Dave, can you talk about that, the fact that President Trump has intervened on his behalf? This man, as the investigation finds, is not only accused of killing a 15-year-old boy who was an ISIS captive being treated by a medic when he was shot by Gallagher. He killed a girl in Raqqa, an older unarmed man, and even before this in Iraq, what he did in Iraq, in Afghanistan, he had killed a little Afghan girl who was being held by a man who was Gallagher's target. He shot the girl and killed both of them to get to the man.
And stabbed the teenage boy.
That's right. So when Chief Gallagher was arrested in September, the Navy took a somewhat unusual move of asking that he be confined in the Navy brig until his trial. And the reason that they did is they say that they had found evidence that he was trying to intimidate witnesses and tamper with the investigation. And so they wanted him in a place where he couldn't do that. His family took up his cause, both his brother, Sean Gallagher, and his wife, Andrea Gallagher, saying, here's a man who's supposed to be innocent unless proven guilty. He hasn't had his day in court. He has an exemplary career, which is absolutely true. And yet he's being put in a cell before he's ever found guilty of anything. And they said that was absolutely outrageous. They said that the reason these allegations had come out was not because the SEAL chief had done anything wrong, but because his platoon was unable to meet his exacting standards.
Actually, Dave, we have Andrea Gallagher, the wife of Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher, speaking with WVW-TV earlier this year.
Let's listen, because this leads to why Trump intervened.
He was named number one chief.
Number one chief.
He was tasked to clear Mosul, and he did it in half the time. So when Mattis said, take the gloves off, my husband listened.
So that's Eddie Gallagher's wife. Continue, Dave Phillips.
They made this case that in the media and really found resonance in conservative media outlets and in conservative lawmakers. So very quickly, a number of Republican congressmen, led by Duncan Hunter of California, signed on, demanding that he be let out of the brig. And they intervened directly, spoke directly to President Trump. President Trump,
and this is Duncan Hunter, who you just mentioned, the Republican Congress member from California.
You have lawyers that don't know what the word combat means, prosecuting guys for killing the enemy. So even if everything that the prosecution said is true, so let's say that Chief Gallagher killed a verified, designated ISIS combatant, my answer is, so what? That's his job, to close with and destroy the enemy through fire and close combat. That's what our military does. We would not have won World War I. We would not have won World War II if we would have fought the way that we have to fight now.
That's the indicted Congress member, Duncan Hunter, the Republican from California. Dave Phillips, describe what he is on trial for. For example, the knifing to death of this 15-year-old teenager.
What his platoon members told investigators is that the chief kind of went off the rails when he got to Mosul, Iraq. They were supposed to be in an advise and assist role supporting Iraqi special forces. And they were supposed to do some oversight with drones and snipers. His job was to be the tactical lead, the person who sits in the back and comes up with the plans. But instead, he spent much of his time in a hidden sniper hide where other snipers said he shot, depending on who you asked, 3 times as much or 20 times as much as other snipers. And as you mentioned at the top, he bragged about how many people he killed. Now, a lot of that may have just been boasting. We don't know how many of those shots actually hit anyone, but there are specifics where other snipers say they witnessed him killing what they saw as people who were clearly civilians. There was one case where a group of girls were walking along the river that runs through the center of the city, and one of the girls wearing a flowered hijab was shot down, and they watched her collapse, and her friends drag her away. In another case, a couple of old men in wispy white beards were along the river as well, and one of them was shot in the back. And the snipers say that in both these cases, it was Eddie Gallagher who took those shots.
And Dave,
now, the case that you mentioned at the top, sorry, go ahead.
We wanted to, very quickly before we conclude, what do you expect to come of the trial?
This is going to be really hard for a prosecutor to prove, as damning as the facts seem. This wasn't investigated until a year later because of the delays. Much of the physical evidence that might have been able to be taken was gone. There is no body for any of these murders. A lot of it comes down to testimony. And so I think that it's a very open question what happens.
And the killing of this teenager you were just about to say?
This is a captive. They called him an enemy, but clearly a captive fighter, someone who's protected by the Geneva Conventions and our own laws of war. He should have been cared for, and he was by the other SEALs. But what the SEALs say is then Edward Gallagher came over and, without really saying anything, took out a custom knife and stabbed him in the neck and in the torso and killed him.
I want to thank you so much for being with us, Dave Phillips. We'll certainly link to your expose in the New York Times, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, correspondent for the Times. The piece headlined, Navy SEALs were warned against reporting their chief for war crimes. And that does it for our broadcast. I'll be speaking at the University of California, Berkeley, and we'll be showing our film, 4 Days in Occupied Western Sahara, Africa's Last Colony. That's Saturday at 6 p.m. at the Genetics and Plant Biology building in Berkeley. Check our website. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. Thanks so much for joining us.